Have you ever wondered what it takes to bridge the gap between leadership and instructional practice in schools? Our guest today is passionate about making that connection.
Intentional and purposeful focus on building a culture of collaboration is the secret for leaders striving to make a difference. In building a culture of collaboration, Kurtis and Lorna Hewson will share simple tips, ideas, and strategies to take your organization's collaborative efforts to the next level.
Welcome to another episode of Building a Culture of Collaboration. I'm Lorna Hewson.
And I'm Kurtis Hewson. And today we're super excited to be joined by Hunter Flesch, an associate principal in Des Moines. Des Moines? How do I say that?
It's so tough. It's Des Moines.
Des Moines. There we go. Des Moines, Iowa. And the host of the Ed Essentials podcast. With a strong background in instructional leadership, student support systems, and school culture, Hunter is dedicated to helping educators thrive. Through his podcast and his leadership work, he shares practical strategies that foster collaboration, improve instructional practices, and enhance school-wide systems. So, excited for this conversation. Welcome to the show, Hunter.
Thank you so much for having me on. I am ecstatic to be on the show. And I was just telling you guys before, I just got done recording with you, Kurtis, and you have left me fired up, ready to go for this next school week. So, so much of the work you guys are doing just resonates so well with the experiences I have now as a young administrator who's really striving for school transformation. So I'm excited. Let's dig in.
All right.
Yeah,
well,
sure.
I mean, we gave the formalized introduction, but I'd love for you to just share what's been your journey to get to the place you're at. And I'm also really curious in what prompted you to start your Ed Essentials podcast as well.
Yeah, it's been a long journey. So I feel like in all my interviews, this is the question I ask, or I say is my response. I come from a family of educators. So I'm a triplet. I have two sisters, one in the nursing field, one in she's a college professor now. We all kind of ended up being in different roles, but both my parents were educators. And so mom was a longtime principal. Dad was a teacher forever at the same building, which you don't see very much anymore. I feel like you see all that bouncing around. And so I always say neither of them ended up going into teaching. So I had to be the one to carry on the tradition. And then ultimately, fast forward to, my first year teaching, gosh, it was the pandemic year. And so I was really struggling, right? I really thought, wow, is this really what teaching is supposed to be like? Is this really what education is all about? And, I was young, I was hungry, I'm passionate, and I just wanted to learn more. But really the pandemic didn't allow me the professional development opportunities, just the same type of opportunities to grow and push myself. And so I really started at the time. I think podcasts were really starting to boom at that point. And I said, why not? I'm reading all these books of these amazing authors, Todd Whitaker, John Hattie, why can't I not email these guys and get them on a podcast? Let's just see what happens. And as you guys very well know, educators are some of the kindest, most generous people. And so that's kind of how Ed Essentials began. Was I really started by doing writing in my student teaching and then developing that into a podcast and really asking experts like yourself all about just the topics as I was growing as an educator, whether it was instructional practices, behavior management, maybe it was a book I was reading at the time, whatever that passion was, I'm like, let's just do an episode on this. So now it's really selfishly, it's been a personal bank of professional development I can now go back to for the rest of time. But now Ed Essentials has really transformed into a show where education meets leadership. I'm very passionate about helping educators who are inspired to lead figure out how can they lead best? How can they truly create the school system that they're looking for and see that transformation, just similar to the work you're doing. But again, every situation is a little bit different. Every context is different. And so I've really been lucky to talk to so many amazing individuals on the podcast.
It's so funny, Hunter, because we also podcasting during pandemic we're feeling like we're not getting out to talk to anyone. How could we bring people in to talk to? But we've often remarked that, and we love the people that are listening and viewing. We always hope they're able to take something away. But truth be told, I think we this if nobody was tuning in. I think we
agree.
Still continue to do this just because the conversations are so meaningful, powerful, and we always end off our show with what are some key learnings for us. And every time we walk away with something that influence our
And
thinking.
there's such amazing people doing amazing work in education, and it's a little bit different with everyone that you talk to. So it's just an incredible process to be involved in that podcast piece.
So, Hunter, wondering, you talk about your parents as teachers. Is there any experience that really stands out for you that has shaped or influenced the leader that you are and are continuing to grow into?
Ooh, coming from my parents specifically, my dad was a longtime science teacher. And so his number one passion was how can I create interest and buy-in in whatever I'm teaching? And that for me really stuck because so often nowadays you get and again, there is total value in this, right? You get your high quality curriculum, you do the absolute best you can to teach it with fidelity. But then what happens when those kids don't quite buy in, or you have the differentiated needs that now you have to adjust for and adapt for, or as we now well know, depending on the level you're in, I was at the middle school level, and so some kids just come in and having this presupposition that I'm bad at science, I can't do this.
Yeah.
So how are you going to create that spark? And so for me and him, I would actually collaborate with him a ton early on, asking him, "Hey, I'm teaching the standard on lunar phases. How could you make this a little bit more engaging, or what might you do to spark some motivation?" And so for me, that's something that was integral as a young teacher. I also, and maybe it's a unique situation, and I don't know if it was related to COVID or related to the school system at the time, but I really had free reign to teach the science how I wanted to. And so that really forced me to be a creator. Think about, you're not given a script. So you got to figure out, what am I going to say to try and encapsulate their attention and maintain that attention for that 54-minute block? And how am I going to make something like lunar phases or genetics or whatever it might be exciting for these kids, something that they can explore and dig into? So from my dad's perspective, I think that's something that I've always taken with me. From my mom's perspective, again, she was a longtime business teacher and then went into her dean role, and then became, rose up the ladder a little bit and then retired as a high school principal. Something she's always taught me is that, my gosh, no matter what area of education you're in, you have to have balance in your personal life and your family life. I'm a triplet. And so my two sisters and I, my mom had us when she was getting her master's degree, middle of teaching,
Wow.
3 kids all at once. And so, and I can barely handle having 2 cats and a dog. And so, you know what I mean?
That's a
it
lot.
just gets so busy, and life is always busy. But for her, she does an amazing job reminding me that we are all humans first. Work will always be there. And especially in a leadership role, and being a young leader, right? Trying to establish those healthy habits. Work will always be there. The most important thing you can do is make sure you spend time with family, and that things are right at home. And then you can always approach work tomorrow. So that's a big takeaway from them that I've really taken now into my leadership.
Oh, love it, Hunter.
That's amazing. And obviously that human interest, human passion that you have takes over at school too. And when we, especially in those circumstances where we have kids who are really struggling with behavior. So love to be able to hear how you have established a collaborative and a systemic response to building those behavior-wide supports across your school.
Yeah, and I know that you even mentioned briefly in our conversation how do I move away from stepping in on all the referrals and calls that are coming to actually getting a system of response.
It's always the thing that that every educator, every school struggles with.
Is that system.
It is so tough. And I think you mentioned this on the podcast, Kurtis, that you went into leadership pretty young, and similar to myself, I went about as fast as you can go. I taught for 4 years, and in my last 2 years, I got my master's and then took the jump to what my mom would call the dark side and went to admin. And I'm now in year 2 of being an associate principal, at a somewhat urban school in the middle of Des Moines. And so, my gosh, the first year, just let alone the responsibilities and the widening of the blinders per se,
Yeah.
and now
Yeah.
you've got all these things that you're seeing and how your system's working, and you're responsible for that. And so that's a lot of pressure, right? Particularly for a young leader, but let alone, okay, Hunter Flesch, you're hired, great. You get to take on all the behavior, right?
Yeah, there
And
you go.
that is a lot of associate principals' roles. And I will say this, and I will preface this too. My principal is nothing short of amazing as far as supporting me, coaching me, making sure that I feel that I've got those in place, so that way I'm not on an island. But with that still comes the responsibility. And so first year, just to paint a picture of the experience. First year, I go in. I know some of the families, right? It's still. I was lucky enough to get hired in the same district, and not all admin get the benefit of that. And so I did have a little bit of an advantage knowing some of the families and the students already. However, as the school year progressed, I mean, I won't get into the big number, but I have this behavior overview, right? And I'm recording data every single month for overall office referrals, behavior data and specifics there. And at the end of the year, I was tired, first of all. But after I got some rest, I looked at the numbers and said, oh my gosh, there were months where we were averaging 17 calls a day. So imagine that you're an administrator sitting at your office and your walkie's getting called 17 different times. And as you well know, you have no clue how long those behaviors are going to last. Some of those might be a 5-minute conversation or a 30-second check-in. Others might take the rest of your day. And so I really spent a lot of time, especially in the second half of my first year, thinking about, hey, this is not sustainable. No person can do this job alone. So then I quickly resorted to, well, what is the framework that I'm going to use? How can I, quote unquote, fight this fire with a framework? And that's really where I've leaned into tier 2. And I know we'll kind of talk about tiers, Kurtis, and your thoughts on that too. But for me and my approach, I really felt like I need to get teacher buy-in into this system, because that tells you a lot. When you have 17 calls a day, it tells you a lot of different things. Number one, there's real issues going on, right? There's certainly behavior challenges, instructional challenges that need to be addressed. But two, there's also the human side of it with our teachers. How are they feeling confident, tolerant, supported to respond to behaviors, whether it is instructionally or it is a true behavioral challenge? So I really started asking those questions and then starting to build the framework around it. And we can dig into it a little bit more in detail here, but that was really my approach going into my second year. And now I'm really happy to say we've drastically reduced the number of calls and the number of referrals this year, even over half. We'll be on track to average 5 calls on a quote unquote busy day. And so now, my gosh, the change for my life as an administrator has been so much improved selfishly, but also I can tell I've been able to spend so much more time in classrooms building the confidence in teachers to do the amazing work with kids, because they're the front line, right? They're the ones experiencing it every single day, intervening, building the relationships with kids. And so long story short, that's kind of where we're at right now. And I'm happy to speak more to the system specifically, but it's been an amazing turnaround from year 1 to year 2.
I would love for you to describe that system. But before we go there, I can also relate as moving into administration and at a younger age. And it was so funny how 1 minute you're a colleague, and because I moved into administration in the school I was teaching as well. And 1 moment you're a colleague, then the announcement comes, and the next day someone comes into your room with, hey, I really need some help around this. And you're going, a week ago, you would have never come and asked me that question. How am I equipped now to be able to
What has changed? What has changed?
I'm still me.
Exactly.
And we had this conversation with a good friend of ours, Darren Papard. And Darren had mentioned that idea of we go into leadership, especially at a younger age. And I was no different at all, where you think the role means you have to put on the Superman cape and respond to everybody's stuff. And I had one person refer to it as goose leadership once. The idea that people come into your office, squawk, drop a load, and then leave and expect you to clean up. And again, that's not meaning any disrespect for people, but I think that often is the response when you don't have a system.
Yeah.
A system.
Yes.
I've said before, and a little bit tongue in cheek, the idea that great leaders don't solve problems. Great leaders create systems to solve problems. And again, I say that knowing, yeah, of course, there's some things that you have to take on. That's part of the role.
Totally.
But systems, focus on the systems to solve the problems for you. So I'd love to get into the weeds with us, Hunter. What does the system look like within your school? Because I know this is something our listeners want to hear, is when we talk about a culture of collaboration and creating vulnerability and conditions and all of that, sometimes it can feel a little bit big picture. Let's get right into the specifics of how do you create a system that puts the people on the front line with the expertise and empowerment. We'll be right back to continue this episode. I wish we had more data, said no teacher ever. Our contemporary schools have an abundance of data we can be accessing to inform decision-making from the classroom level to the school level and beyond. Data as a focal point is no longer elusive. The challenge lies in structuring and presenting it in a way that facilitates easy interpretation and actionable insights. How we organize the data matters. My name is Kurtis Hewson, lead learner and co-founder of Jigsaw Learning. In this free on-demand webinar, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 mistakes leaders make when organizing data for their teams. Access this webinar, and in addition to how to address these 5 mistakes, numerous free resources will be shared with you that you can begin using immediately. I can't wait to have you join me to ensure you aren't committing one or several of these mistakes within your own organization. And now back to our conversation.
Yeah, and I'll start too by saying this. My principal has worked really hard in our building to establish, and you mentioned it on my show, to establish these banks. And he calls them tights and loose, right? What are my tights?
Richard Dufour talked about that too. Same thing.
Yep, exactly. And so he has made it very clear, especially instructionally. What are the tights, right? What does high quality instruction across the board? What does curriculum fidelity look like? What are the things that, as far as professional development? And our school utilizes the National Institute for Excellence of Teaching. And so with that comes a lot of, we call it cluster. So that's built-in weekly professional learning. So there's a lot of built-in structures to support teachers instructionally. So I'll start there. And he's done a great job establishing those tights. And what we can be loose on. So that's key. If you don't have that's where I would start. As far as the behavior side goes, I was able to build off of those tights and looses and say, okay, first of all, we've got all of this data that we don't know what to do with. So let's start creating some boundaries and some parameters to figure out who we can intervene with. We really thrive. Like, our school has gotten very good intervening instructionally, right? We have this massive data spreadsheet. We've got graduating classes of kids. We can go back years and years and see these reading scores and these reading interventions and see fall, winter, spring. How are kids improving over time? Who's going to be intervening? Yeah. How are we adjusting these flood groups every 6 weeks? And so the academic intervention's gotten really effective, and teachers now it's a second language for them. Yeah. So my whole goal is, well, why can't we do that for behavior? Right? Yeah. Why can't we do that for
replicate?
Exactly. And so now I've really come up with a good system. And again, this is something that's universal for all teachers. It just takes a little bit of data organizing. But again, I think it meshes well with what you guys do with collaborative response of, once you have the data, how do you respond to it?
Yeah.
So I start by pulling panorama data. I basically make this massive spreadsheet. I say export, and it gives me all the student data I need. It gives me attendance data. It gives me behavior data. It gives me literacy data, academic data, right? And all I've done, and there's no science behind this, right? I just take, because in Panorama, it will score them, persistently at risk, somewhat at risk, achieving or on par for graduation, and it has those different layers. All I've done is assign a risk score, right? So if they are a student who's excelling at literacy, they'll get a 0, right, for 0 risk at that level, all the way up to a 2, right? So I do that for each category, 0, 1, or 2, attendance, academics, behavior, and then we total up the risk score at the end, and that gives us a holistic set of data to really analyze now. Okay, and you mentioned this on the show too, Kurtis. Where does this student belong in intervention? Is this a student that we see, oh my gosh, their attendance is really the one big risk factor that's causing them to be at risk right now? So let's get them hooked up with our student assistance team, or let's connect them with our school social worker and see what kind of communication can happen to home. Or you might see that one student who attendance is not a problem. You got those administrators that are thinking of those students right now. Those naughty kiddos, they do not struggle with attendance. They are always at school. So clearly that's not an issue, but I notice now there's that academic piece too, right? Where's the disconnect there? How can I intervene? And so ultimately, now that I've got this spreadsheet that I bring to our, and I call it Tier 2 team, it's really allowed us as a team, and this team consists of grade level representatives across the board. So every single grade is represented. And based on the good structures of collaboration we have through PLCs and through cluster, teachers are very comfortable in communicating about and being transparent. Hey, I am struggling with this student, right? So we utilize those representatives to bring students who are potentially struggling, or just analyze the data and say, okay, here are the kiddos we're going to intervene for. The second piece was figuring out what is the boundaries that we're going to start looking at here, because you mentioned this too. Like when we think about the MTSS triangle, that Tier 3 quote unquote support requires the absolute most amount of adults to be at the table.
Yes.
So for us as a team, I had to really say, nope, if they're at this parameter here, we are not going to discuss them. That is a conversation that's held for another time. Right now, our job is to make sure we're providing Tier 2 interventions, something that all our teachers have been trained on, something that they can quote unquote prescribe. We really want to think of Tier 2 as prescriptive, something that any teacher can look at that those accommodations or that intervention plan and say, yep, I can do that, now go. It doesn't have to be tailored to the student necessarily. So really that's kind of where we started. And through the cyclical nature of that data analysis, we've gotten really, really good at saying, yep, this kiddo needs that Tier 2 support, that little extra. In addition to, I think this whole process has really allowed us to clarify what is Tier 1 instruction, Tier 1 accommodations look like. So long story short, I think that's really the nature of the system is we've determined what our data is supposed to look like. We've determined some boundaries with our data. And then now with our focus on Tier 2, it's really built the teacher's capacity in providing those interventions. It's really also built clarity on what is kind of expected out of Tier 1 for our teachers. And then they also know that, I know Tier 3 is something totally separate. There's gonna be a lot of adults involved. So I know that student that is a big struggle in my class is going to get the support. It's just not in this meeting. So it's really built a lot of confidence, a lot of competence in our teachers. Again, not a perfect system. I'm still trying to refine it as we go. Still trying to improve the fidelity of interventions. There's always those little areas of growth. But again, for me, going from having no system, answering 17 walkie calls a day, to now we've reduced that down so much because I've shared the load with a teammate or with a set of teachers. We all feel bought into helping our school function at a higher level.
Oh my goodness, you are singing our song.
Absolutely. Well, that's why you were so excited before, because there are so many overlaps between what we do and what you have done through this behavior support piece.
But again, it's all about how do we create the system?
The system.
And systems then will always need tweaks and refinements, but without a system, there is no clarity around what shows up at your door and what shouldn't. Let's get crystal clear.
Well, and really having a solid understanding about what our data is telling us, and we're gathering it all the time. We need to be able to respond to that. But what is the response? And being really clear on providing that, this is what we do, and this is the system that we use to provide that response.
Absolutely. And I think a huge piece you're kind of touching on is the training aspect for our teachers. So yes, we can totally say, okay, our students struggling, they're in the yellow, they're kind of flagging as some risk. So yep, we're going to provide a tier 2 intervention. Something that I've really gotten away from my first year to now is we used to blanket check in, check out for kids at a tier 2 level. And we'd say, okay, no matter what, if they flag here, they're going to get check in, check out. But if you really peel that back, it wasn't really effective, right? You could say and have a lot of data at your fingertips and say, yep, now we're monitoring all those kids and we can pat ourselves on the back and feel good about tracking the progress. But is it actually meeting the function of their behavior? And so a lot of training that we've done is on, and you guys are familiar with this, the ABCs of behavior, antecedent, behavior, consequence. And so I've done a lot of, when I have my opportunities to speak in front of staff, I get, it's not me bringing the data to them. It's really, okay, these are the concepts of ABC. Talk about a student that you're struggling with in your classroom. What do you believe are those antecedents?
Yeah.
And then all I've done is, hey, you're going to write that kiddo on a note card. You're going to identify their behavior and then tell me or collaborate with your team here at the table, whether it's grade level, whether it's cross-curricular, anyone in the building. Identify now, what are some of those consequential strategies? And when we say consequence, it doesn't mean discipline. It means what's your response? Right. And then now they have those tier 1 strategies that they maybe weren't considering before, or maybe they knew it all along and just for whatever reason, teaching gets busy, they get away from it. We're going to get back to this. And that alone has really, really helped our conversations in our tier 2 team. Now we're talking about, what are the antecedents? What is the true function of the behavior? Rather than just talking about, you mentioned Kurtis on the show, going down a rabbit hole of the story of the kid and how they're so at risk and how their family is divorced and all these things that at the end of the day, and I maybe sound harsh, it's an excuse, right? When we have the student in the building with us, what are we truly doing with them?
Right.
Right. They're here with us. So what are we going to do? So I think that's really just, again, we mentioned clarity a lot, but it's really helped in clarity of language when we talk about behavior concerns. It's really helped clarify the different levels of tier 1 and tier 2, and made our response when we do spend the time together, planning and collaborating, much more focused and intentional. So that way, when we do ask our teachers to implement this or try a tier 2 intervention, we know it has a really good chance of being effective.
Yeah. Excellent.
I wonder if clearly this is having impact on students, positive impact. And like you said, your calls have gone way down compared to what was happening before. But love to hear you talk a little bit about how that structure and framework has had an impact on your staff.
Yeah. I think it really just builds buy-in. I've learned very quickly, I can sit in my office and crunch data. I can analyze students. I can make calls to parents, but me having ownership over that only goes so far. Ultimately, the framework really puts the teachers in the driver's seat. They are the ones who see the students the majority of the day and just truly get to know them best. And so the framework, and I don't know, you mentioned ready, fire, shoot earlier, right? And so when I was figuring out, like, how do I want to do this? Because I can't keep doing this by myself. I just said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get a team together. It may not be perfect, right? We're always going to refine. We're going to
fire and then tweak. Refine,
yes, but we'll tweak as we go, but we have to get people at the table. And long story short, I really tried to shoulder tap individuals from each grade level who, they have strong backgrounds. Some have special education backgrounds who are great with identifying unique accommodations for kids. I've also partnered with our area education agency, our AEA folks, to come in and provide support. I'm lucky too that we're a small district, and so I've even had our director of special education, our director of HR, who used to be an administrator in the district, right, coming to these meetings to offer insight and support. And so now it very much feels that framework very much feels like how we intervene for flood, right? It's collaborative, it's driven by data. We are very intentional with our decisions, and we also have a very clear time frame for how long we want this intervention to run before we're going to come back and say it wasn't successful, or it was successful, right? It also, having that framework, again, I cannot state enough for teachers, it gives them those mental banks.
Yeah.
Okay, I know I'm supposed to be implementing these tier 1 interventions every single day with fidelity before I can move on, right? And it's not to say that we're trying to be strict. We're not trying to push more onto their plate.
Yeah, you're not trying to download the responsibility onto people who are already very busy.
Because guess what? We were at this level of, and I show this to my staff all the time. Last year, our tip of the triangle, you'll call it, the tier 3 was drastically higher, right, than it is now. So my whole goal was myself, the teacher, the special education folks, or whoever it might be, all those folks that are providing that intensive support, we've got to reduce that, but we can't reduce it by just focusing on those kids.
Yeah.
So we're going to push pause on this. Let's focus here in the tier 1, tier 2 levels. So I think we've just really seen some good results from it.
Have you ever read the book Upstream? And I think it's by Dan. I know one of the Heath brothers. I think it's Dan Heath.
Okay, I'm not.
Okay. So at the start of the book, he shares a parable that is used in health system all the time. The idea that you're in a river with, or you're sitting at the bank of a river with a friend, and you notice a kid going down the river, struggling, drowning. So you jump in and you save that kid, and then, oh my goodness, there's another kid. And you and your buddy are just pulling kids out of the water, left, right, and center. And then the buddy gets up and leaves to go out of the river, and you scream, "What are you doing? There's all these kids coming. Like, get back here." And he says, "No, I'm going upstream to see who's throwing these kids in the river." And the idea is if we can apply upstream thinking, and put in those proactive supports. And in the case in a school, it's the classroom. If we can put that support at the classroom level, yes, we're still going to need to have systems in place to respond for our at-risk. Intensive supports, of course. But you can't rely on that being your primary mechanism of ensuring success across your school. You need
and Hunter,
upstream systems.
It's really what you have done in your school is created that system that we can ensure we're not just in that reactive mode, or we're not accessing those intensive supports consistently because it really has been nothing else.
Yeah. And you guys made me think of a quote, and I can't remember who it's by, but during my master's program, Doug Stillwell, Randy Peters, I'll give them a shout out at Drake University. I know they're not with the program anymore, but they were fantastic. And so much of our work was around Debbie Edwards Deming and systems improvement. I'm sure you guys are familiar.
Yeah. Very familiar.
Yes. And so it's something along the lines of the system's working exactly how it's supposed to. And so my first year of being an administrator, I really had to be vulnerable and say, you know what? The system is designed how it's supposed to be, and these are the results that we're getting. So I have to address the system. I can't place blame on anybody else.
No,
it's not a teacher failure. It's not an administrator failure. It is a system failure. So how do I adjust the system? And that really connects with the upstream. How can I look around the corner and say, this framework needs to be adjusted so I can put my teachers in the best position possible to succeed? And really, you're building culture that way. You're saying, this is how we do business, right? We're not going to continue just being firefighters, because that doesn't do anyone good. It doesn't do the student good. It doesn't do the person responding any good. And frankly, for parents too, I mean, that's an unsung part of this is I can't even imagine how some of those parents are feeling, getting all those phone calls, and you always talk about the positive to negative ratio. Well, when I'm getting 17 calls a day, my positive to negative ratio probably wasn't great.
No.
So what kind of system is that, right? So yes, I cannot say it enough. I also think of Deming's when he talks about the interdependence of parts, right? And that really is a leader's responsibilities to understand, okay, I've got the blinders off. I can see everything within the system. I understand what I'm asking of my grade level teachers as far as the collaboration, the expectations, the banks that I've set up in place. How do I want them collaborating, working together in order to get this outcome? And again, that's why the entire podcast we did, Kurtis, I was just vigorously nodding my head because it just makes so much sense to be so structured in collaboration. I remember when I was a teacher and I had some very negative experiences collaborating with team level teachers because we didn't have that structure in place.
Yeah.
Not because anyone was a bad person,
No.
but constantly going through and thinking, oh, well, here we go again with another meeting that we're not going to get anything done with, or we're just going to complain about so-and-so. And 40 minutes later, what did I get done? Right. And to have that understanding now of I am in control of the system. I have the capacity to change the system and affect the interdependence of those parts to get the best outcome. I think it's really empowering.
It's interesting too, Hunter. We often say that when you're in that leadership role in any organization, but we focus in on education, of course, is without building systems, you're completely people reliant. And you can have great people in your organization for sure, but people move, people transition, people change, systems can endure. And so the idea is if you don't have systems and an administrator leaves a building and another one comes in, and now we're totally redoing how we function in a school. No, put the focus in on the system. And I've had one experience where had a principal say, well, I've created time for the teachers to collaborate, but they don't use it effectively. And my response back is, okay, but what systems have you put in place to support that collaboration? What expectations have you put? Have we modeled what it looks like? So I would love to hear, what are some things that you've done specifically, Hunter, to help build some of those structures for effective collaboration, that it's not just, I have a spreadsheet, I hand it to people, and best of luck.
And away we go. Right. Oh, I cannot relate to that enough. There were countless times where, as I was going through my master's program and sitting in those collaborative meetings and thinking, teach them how to do it.
Yeah.
It's a skill. It's a skill set to learn.
Yes. And we can't blindly expect that adults know how to do things. And that's not to say we're treating anyone negatively or in a rude way. But when you're truly thinking about systemic efforts and systemic fidelity to this framework and this process, we have to model how. And so for me, I think when I spoke to, the ABC training for our staff, really getting clear on the language of behavior. And then during our meetings, I'm not the one recording. I've got teachers recording. That way I can be the facilitator that holds things tight. We're only spending so much time per student. And so when you think about those structures, you do have to be clear. And for us, I really try to lead positively and say, here's exactly what we need to get done today. We need to make sure we analyze tier 2 behavior data to make sure our interventions are where they're supposed to be. We're going to say, okay, we're going to identify follow-up folks for those interventions that are not being successful. Grade level teammates, you're going to follow up with those teachers and figure out what support do they need. Is it, and it can be a variety of options, right? We want to empower the teachers. So grade level member, I have some amazing teammates. They will go to their grade levels, because I will say this too. We run a 4-day school week, which has been, I think, transformative for our building as well. But that's also given us a lot of time. And so on those days, teachers do have the time now to go back to their grade levels and say, hey, you use Daniel in our podcast, so I'll stick with Daniel. Daniel, he's been receiving check-in, check-out for 6 weeks now. We noticed that he's below the 80% threshold. What do you think some of those struggles are? What are you still seeing? What kind of support might you like? Would it be a check-in from me, right? Do you want me to come in and do some extra planning with you? Do you want an administrator come in and make some contact and add that to my list, right? Giving them some empowerment for the type of support that they want. Honestly, as far as framework goes, I think it's something that I still want to continue fleshing out. My big thing is that I'm not the one that is, yes, I do go through the data and I provide that and share that in advance with our team. but I'm not making decisions beforehand. All I'm really doing is saying, we are sticking to this agenda,
Yeah.
right? I will be the point guard. I'm a big basketball sports guy, so I will be the point guard facilitating. And then teammates, here's what I expect of you. I want you to be the leaders who can speak to what that teacher might be struggling if they're not in the room. What is the antecedent to some of those behaviors that when you're having that conversation with the student, what that is like, and then what are some of the strategies and things that you're trying consistently. Another piece of this too, and as I'm kind of workshopping this, we just recently did an entire fidelity check, quote unquote, walkthrough. And so something that we're seeing is, gosh, a lot of our interventions tier 2 wise, you either see it implemented incredibly well, or you see it not implemented at all. But I'm wondering now, is that really the right thing that we should be doing? Is that really measuring what we want? Because some of those students, I bet, if we were to look at the 0%, I bet those students are still being successful. And so what does that show us too? I think the next piece, as I'm reflecting out loud here, is really establishing a framework for what accommodations would we expect to see at a tier 1 level? What accommodations would we expect to see at the tier 2 level, and broaden it instead of saying, here's what check in, check out is supposed to look like 100% of the time during a lesson. Because there's so much more that we know goes on at the tier 1 and tier 2 level. So, I'm kind of thinking out loud here, but those are the things that I'm thinking about moving forward. And again, I know it's not necessarily a written framework, but it really is about putting your teachers in the position to, hey, I'm the one facilitating. Teachers, I want you to be the ones discussing and leading the conversations on your grade level students. I want you to be able to speak to the accommodations, behaviors, consequences that are occurring in the classroom. And then what are your suggestions, or how can we collaboratively come to an agreement on the level of support, or that continuum you mentioned, the continuum of support we can provide for that student.
Yeah.
Hunter, I don't know if you've ever heard this quote. It's credited to T.S. Eliot, the poet, but it goes like this: when forced to work within a strict framework, the imagination is taxed to its utmost and will produce its richest ideas. Given total freedom, the work is likely to sprawl. And we see that over and over again.
We've all lived that.
Yeah, because sometimes when people say, oh, you're making such a tight box that we're operating in, what about the space for imagination and creativity and innovation and asking what if kind of conversations? I don't see those as conflicting ideas. It's really create a tight box, and then everyone understands that box. No one, like you said, is sitting there going, when is this meeting going to end? When is this person going to get us back on track? Whatnot. I don't have to spend any of my mental capacity focusing on that. My 100% focus can be on that question of what should we do. I saw a school that we had worked with where at their meetings they had tent cards. And on one side of the tent card that was facing, and they were sitting around a table, on one side that was facing the people was, here's our team norms. And then they had, what's the purpose of this meeting that we're in? And it was that collaborative team meeting I mentioned to you before. Let's remember the purpose of it. The other side of the tent card, and I'm mentioning this because you said it exactly, had one phrase on it, and it's, but what are we going to do? And it was meant as a visual reminder that let's not stare at the problem, not admire the problem. Let's get right to that. But what are we going to do? What could we do around this?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Because again, teachers want to feel like they're making progress. And there is a culture piece to this. There's a huge culture piece to this. Teachers and educators want to feel like their time is valued and not wasted. So when you're going to ask, and for me, when I was thinking about, okay, well, I'm going to ask these teachers, I want them to come collaborate. I want them to help solve these behavior challenges because they're experts. And I think we've got an amazing staff, but oh my gosh, like what if they say no? Well, so what? Get the people that you want involved, or get the people that are ready to do the work and just start. Right? Just start, get it going. There was so much in my first couple of years of just admiring the problem, like you mentioned, and meeting for the sake of meeting. And there's nothing more frustrating and more defeating than taking a hungry, inspired person and for lack of better terms, just wasting time. We don't have time to waste. And frankly, our students don't have time either. right? And luckily I'm in the elementary, and now it is very rewarding for me to see the growth of a kindergartner all the way through fourth grade.
Yeah.
And so that's a beautiful thing. But for our teachers, we have to make sure that they are having the most impact possible when they have them. And so that's been a piece of this too, is the culture side. For me, I've just been very blessed. Like I said, my principal has done a very, very nice job of, and speaking vulnerably with staff often about culture, and often about like expectations within the building. Our culture is what we allow it to be. And building that collective responsibility around it. And so for me, when I began this tier 2 team to really try to revolutionize our MTSS system, our teachers were ready. They were chomping at the bit, because they knew, like, wow, I see this behavior data. I know it's a problem, and I've experienced it too. I want to take part in solving that and helping my team. So there definitely is a culture piece to this. But if you're a teacher or an administrator that's listening, and you're thinking about, oh gosh, I don't know if I have the people to do this, or I don't know if my culture's ready, or maybe you're that principal that's field testing, we'll call it. You know how you can get away with a lot of things is call it a pilot. We're piloting this framework, we're piloting this system, but that's how you start the work, and then over time you build the numbers. But
just
just get it going.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice to those in leadership and trying to establish that culture of collaboration. What else would you say to leaders as a piece of advice trying to move forward on their culture of collaboration?
We'll be right back to continue this episode.
We have all felt like this before when engaging in team meetings, feeling like our time is not being maximized, or that this could have just been an email. As a leader, how can we ensure this is not the reality for everyone in the room? Rather than just simply coming together into a shared space, we really need to ensure that whenever we are engaging as a team in meetings, that the time is being utilized to its utmost, and that we are truly seeing impact as a result of our conversations. My name is Kurtis Hewson, lead learner and co-founder of Jigsaw Learning. In this free on-demand webinar, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 planning considerations and then 5 facilitation considerations that you can put into place as a leader to take your team meetings to the next level. Access this webinar, and in addition to these 10 considerations, numerous free resources will be shared that you can begin using immediately. I can't wait to have you join me to learn how we can ensure that team meetings are having their optimal impact.
And now back to our conversation.
Yeah. Well, ultimately too, there is a sense of, educators' plates are full. And so when you are presenting this, I think it's okay to be vulnerable about it and be honest about it. Teachers don't want the rigmarole. They know what feels like a checkbox and what feels like really powerful work. But I also think that educators, and particularly school leaders, have a distinct power to really paint the picture for staff as to why this matters. And so if you can share these things and saying, hey, this is the reality of our situation, right? We struggled. And I never shared the total behavior calls with staff. I didn't share that with them, but we had to get real with a lot of our teachers, mid-year and say, guys, we cannot continue operating this way. We are doing everything we absolutely can. We know that long-term, this is where we're going. We are changing the system for this. Here's what we need from you right now. There is a lot of power with your staff in saying, I only want you to focus on this. Right. I only want you to focus on being a great instructor, focusing on curriculum, whatever that might be at the time, and accepting that, hey, maybe you're tier 3. We're not ready for those conversations yet. Our capacity is not there yet. So when you are thinking about building those collaborative structures, I do think that there is a huge element of how you paint that picture, right? If you're trying to sell this to your staff, if you're trying to get their interest in this. And I also think there's a sense of reality check too. And that's okay. I don't think leaders should shy away from that. It is the right work. When I talk about systems thinking and continuous improvement and implementing those processes and procedures, that is the right work.
Yeah.
And when you get your teachers involved with it, they feel that too.
Yeah.
And if you can continue to celebrate, something I always like to do with our staff is just, I'm very transparent. I share the numbers and as what our trajectory is like, how many kids are high risk, some risk, low risk, and that type of thing. But I often am comparing it from years past. And so it's a really nice backdrop to say, oh my gosh, guys, when we think about this system work that we're doing, whether it's this all staff wide behavioral PD, or it's the work that we're doing as a system and at the tier 2 level, tier 1 level, I'm celebrating so much with our staff of all the ways that they are improving and growing. Something you mentioned as part of the collaborative team meeting is the celebration, Kurtis, and that's something I've really tried, and I just didn't know it, but maybe I was doing a collaborative team meeting structure with staff. Every single PD, I always start with, tell your table what's a win with a student you've had that's been really powerful for you, and just giving educators time to share positives then allows them to disarm themselves, believe in themselves a little bit more, and then now be ready for the problem solving aspect. If we just dig right into, all right, we've got 28 kids that are tier 3, what are we going to do to help monitor their behavior intensives? Whoa, they're not ready for that.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not ready. And so you do, as a leader, have to have a pulse on the system. But again, I think that there's a lot of power in celebrating the positive and how you go about painting the picture for the work that you're about to do, whether it's collaborative as a school or collaborative as just a small team.
It's so funny that you share that idea of, can we paint a reality and then continue to show improvement? And the simplest example, we had worked with a school where they knew that there were struggles within the school, and we needed to get really focused in on it. And the first place was they knew that the kids were struggling through literacy, but let's look for a screener tool. Let's find something that we can use, because we can't just say we have lots of kids that struggle. We need to get specific. And when they did that, they found out, I think it was like 18 or 22% of students based on this tool that are reading at the benchmark. So they were able to paint that reality. But the beautiful thing that did in that situation is we took a simple number line that I'm sure is in every one of your kindergarten and grade 1 teachers' classroom, the 0 to 100 number line that's up above a whiteboard. They put that in their staff room, and they put a star on the 18 and said, okay, this is where we're at. Now, they painted a really clear reality that whatever we're doing has to shift. And I love what you say. I've heard this often, that the system is created to produce the results that it gets. So we can't expect different results using the same system. We need a new system. So they put all these pieces in place. And the next time they did that screener, they were at 45%, and they went and put a star on that. What a great visual reminder on those days when I'm feeling exhausted, tired. I come down to the staff room and I look up and go, okay, that's why we're doing this. Like, that was powerful. 45% of less than half of your kids at benchmark is still, we need to keep going, but that's a huge jump that we've made to reinforce.
It's huge. That's huge. I immediately think of back in my master's program, Doug would always have us do, Dr. Stillwell, I shouldn't call him Doug, Dr. Stillwell, he would always have us complete a capacity matrix. And so he'd have all the components of the skills and content that you're learning. Weekend 1, okay, yep, we're all 0s and 1s, haven't learned much about this, maybe have a little background knowledge on a couple topics. And then over time, he would create a bell curve chart, bell curve. And so you would see that curve start to increase in our confidence and competence. And so what a cool way for us to say, wow, like over the course of time, our self as staff and educators is growing too. And what a powerful tool to use with staff as well. I was actually just having a conversation with my principal and our master teachers, instructional coaches, and figuring out how can we best support our instructional leadership team and help visualize their growth as well. So often we are looking at students and knee deep in the trajectory and the level of proficiency for students and literacy and math and all those things. But how often are we doing that with our staff?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a good thing that we're going to try and tackle here in the coming months. But yeah, any visual way that you can paint the picture of growth and progress, and remind people that this is the right work. Something I think about too is, as a leader, and my parents always used to say this too, education is a pendulum. And so you might have that popular buzzword initiative, 1 year, and then 7 years later, it switches back to the other thing before. And as a leader, you've got to determine, what do you truly believe at the end of the day is the right work to be doing? And ultimately, if you believe in the system and how you want to do business and get very clear, and Doug would say, you have to put that process on paper, right? You mentioned this earlier, Kurtis. People come and go, but systems can withstand the test of time. So if you can't get that system written down on paper clearly, you probably need to go back and refine the system. So there's something to that, I think, as well, for leaders to consider as they're thinking about, how do I improve the system and how do I make this all work? Get it put on paper.
It's interesting you say that. That's one of our first things that we do with schools when, on your podcast where I talked about those 4 layers of team, we start right away by saying, okay, what do you have in your school? Write it down. What's its purpose? Who's involved? When does it happen for each one of these meetings? And then we're going to start getting really clear. And eventually we want to be able to have that visual that we can share with our staff of, here's all the different ways we are collaborating within our building, its purpose, how does it align? How do all of these systems support and connect to one another? It's not just, I don't know why we have so many meetings.
Yes.
When you do it that way, you can start reducing meetings, or the ones you're having become that much more meaningful. I've seen it with my own eyes. We've experienced within our own team that when you can get clear on the systems and the structures, and that people start to look forward to meetings, which I know there's going to be some listening that go, yeah, right. Whatever. When people say, I wish we could get rid of meetings, I think what they mean is, I wish we could get rid of unproductive meetings. We've all been in spaces where the 40 minutes went by and go, that was such a rich use of my time.
Yes. I think it's very interesting, Kurtis, and maybe it's more societal nowadays too. We are in this culture of quick fix. You think of ordering an Amazon delivery and we get frustrated and mad that our Amazon delivery doesn't come the very next day, right? Our level of patience and tolerance and for timeliness and for and we think about this like, well, I'll just pay for it. Whatever it is, I would just want to buy it and it'll fix it. Right? Like, okay, you're going to buy this magical program and it's going to fix it. No. Exactly. The right work, when I use this term, the right work, it's not glamorous. Doesn't have to be a bright, shiny new curriculum or a bright, shiny new PBIS program. And again, I don't know why I said PBIS, just they're great, but it doesn't mean that you just have to spend all this money and throw it at it. Right. David Langford was on my show, and he did a ton of work around that in his time in Alaska. When he really got into the systems thinking, continuous improvement within his building. And he went to a district that really had to do away with like throwing thousands of dollars at programming. And really what he did was focus on, who are my teachers in the building? How can I put them in the best position to succeed? But also, how can I put our students in a position to contribute to the system? How can I gain feedback from them too? Because they will tell you everything you need to know. And so oftentimes in my classroom, I did a lot of community circles, restorative practices, things of those nature to really build a culture of vulnerability and sharing. But in addition, when I was planning for a future unit, I would say, okay, I'm going to have, I forget what the activity is called, but I would have whiteboards all across the room. And each of them had a different topic on it. And I would say, okay, write your feedback for me. What do you want from this topic? Like, what do you want to learn about? Or how would you want to learn? How would you best learn? And I would ask all these questions and get feedback from kids. And then ultimately I would show them, okay, guys, based on what you showed me, you're showing me you don't want to do sit and get, you want project-based, you want self-paced. And so ultimately I ended up moving my entire classroom to, I'll give credit to the Teach Better team, the grid method. And so I went from, doing a sit and get kind of stand and deliver style of teaching to self-paced learning, mastery learning, all because I utilize those system tools to garner feedback from kids. I would even do things like little procedures, hot dot voting, right? We're doing this collectively, kids. What are we going to choose today, or what are we going to vote on it, and have every student participate in that to guide the system. They're the ones that are when we think about the interdependent parts. Well, back in the day, it was my students. So how can I use them and implement them into the process to get the best feedback? And now you're doing that as a building leader.
I was just going to make the connection.
Right?
We often talk
Parallel.
about how as a leader, can you
Yeah.
put the same structures, routines,
Exactly.
systems in place that work in a
Yep.
classroom? And we're
So
not
for an-
saying our staff are like children. No, of
No.
course not.
No,
But we're
no.
creating systems.
Yes. Like for instance, we were in an instructional leadership team meeting and we were trying to plan our learning walks for the upcoming month. And we were really trying to have good conversations around, and our rubric has 19 different indicators, right? You know, things like grouping, assessment, student work, academic feedback, right? All these different things. So we're trying to figure out what's going to have the highest leverage. Well, let's put them through a process to figure out what the best answer could be. Because if we just leave it open-ended, we're just going to end up talking for this whole meeting and having no clue where we really want to land.
Yeah.
And you might get lucky, right? You might get lucky and have a really good meeting and everyone happens to be on the same page, but you can't operate that way.
Yeah.
Regularly. And so I would definitely agree. I forget what the book is called. It's David Langford is the author, but he's got this entire book and toolkit of little procedures like that, whether it's data analysis or procedural for teams, that is so helpful. It's been really powerful for me. I will I'm going to search it up right now, but I would highly recommend for leaders who are trying to figure out, okay, I have the system, I have the team put together. How do I get them to vote on this procedure? Or how do I get them to analyze data effectively? He's got some really, really awesome tools that I would recommend.
Great.
That is a nice plug. We will make sure that gets included in the show notes.
Well, Hunter, this has been such an amazing conversation, and we have so much enjoyed it and so excited about the work that you're doing and how it overlaps with what we're doing.
Absolutely.
And we want to share our book with you because I think there's so many things that you'll recognize. And with your conversation with Kurtis earlier too, realizing that, I mean, there's such amazing work to be done when we really focus on that systems piece.
So Hunter, what's the best way if anyone's listening to this and want to learn more, to connect with your podcast or to connect with you personally?
I would love to hear from anyone that's listening. I'm such an open book. Like I said, I've been very blessed with educators who are just so generous with their time, like you two, that want to share, and I'm the same way. So if you want to connect with me, a good email address is edessentials.network@gmail.com. Otherwise, you can connect with me on social media. If you search Hunter Flesch, Flesch, or search @edessentials, I'll pop up. I have a website, edessentials.net. You can see a little bit more about me. Podcasts I've been on, I'll link this one on there as well.
Awesome.
You can connect with my show. It's called the Ed Essentials Podcast, the show where education meets leadership. Again, it's really designed to support leaders in transforming their schools and being as effective as they can. So I would love to connect with you and just hear more about your journey and learn how I can be of help, if any. That's really what education is all about, is spreading the wealth, sharing effective tools and strategies to really make the impact for kids. So I would love to hear from you.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a pleasure, Hunter, and we know that those listening or viewing are going to get a lot out of this conversation. So thank you for your time, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. It has truly been a pleasure. And again, I'll plug for you guys. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe to anything Kurtis is putting out there. Oh my gosh, it's wonderful. So thank you so much for the learning this morning, both of you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Take care, Hunter.
Yes, thank you.
So, unbeknownst to anyone viewing or listening, I had a chance to speak for an hour prior to with Hunter on his podcast, and I was remarking here that there's so many connections
Oh,
to
so many.
what we know and understand and believe in, and what Hunter's there is looking at. But again, that focus on systems. As a leader, how are you creating systems? And I love the reminder of what are our tights and
Yeah.
what are the things we can be loose on. That's a
Yeah.
huge part of creating a clear system for what we would expect to see in our school.
Yeah, and setting those expectations out so that we all understand how we function within that system.
Yeah.
The other thing that Hunter was talking about is really that idea that, we gather data and we determine interventions in conjunction with that data around academic concerns. And we're really good at doing that. But when it comes to behavior, we sometimes forget all of those lessons that we've learned
Yeah,
through
implement
the
the same
instruction, but
same
it's really
principles.
the same. Yeah, about gathering the data, using that data to flag who are the students that we need to be talking about, and then moving to what are the supports that we can put in place for them.
The part that really stood out, and we talk this all the time with schools, but Hunter exemplified it with the data of just creating simple criteria. So he said, I then go and I have some criteria to let me put a 0, a 1, or a 2 to it to be able to say, in this area, there's 0 risk, moderate risk, higher risk.
And I like that risk score too.
Yeah. And that aligns 100% when we've said color code the data to be able to say red, yellow, green. The same principle applies, and it doesn't have to be overly sophisticated, especially to start. And I loved his reminder. We say it all the time. Just start. Just start, even if it's a simple criteria. Just start. Paint that reality. And it's hard to paint a reality without data. But create that reality and then create the spaces to ask the question over and over and over again around, okay, so what do we do?
But when he also talked about how they put in a blanket supportive check-in, check-out. And that they realized that blanket support for everyone is not exactly appropriate for every possible situation. And so really thinking about, once we know who are the students we need to focus on, matching the intervention with what the child needs.
But then again, mapping it out as a system approach. And I loved his final reflection of, it's got me thinking of, I need to write this down. We need to document the system. I think that was a really great reminder that he had shared from his master's work of, can you put it to paper and really understand the system? And we mentioned Darren Papard. I always go back to his podcast that he talks about leadership from the balcony, and had shared that story where sometimes he'd have to go into his gymnasium, sit up in the balcony as a reminder that sometimes I have to step back to see the big picture and understand the big picture. And what a better understanding of the big picture than it is to write it down. Get it clarified.
And really being clear in articulating the structures and processes that we're using to ensure that our environment is successful for students, but also successful for our staff and for our teachers. Absolutely. And he mentioned a couple of times that is the right work.
It is, absolutely. So with that, love for you to check out the Ed Essentials podcast that Hunter puts out. Great conversations that will have you thinking as well. And please like, share, subscribe to this, whether you're listening to it on a podcast platform or watching it on YouTube. Hope that there's been some value and some takeaways from our conversation with Hunter. As always, we wish you all the best in your continuing work of building your culture of collaboration.
See you soon.
Jigsaw Learning, founded by Kurtis and Lorna Hewson, is a team of educators who work with schools, districts, and educational leaders to establish collaborative response to ensure success for all students. Because every child deserves a team.